Hi guys, what is going on, and welcome back to another video on Conqueror's Blade. So, we are finally getting around to having a bit of a look at the ShieldMaidens. Yeah, a few days late in actually getting this sort of video out together, but quite a lot going on, particularly with some of the New World stuff kicking off as well, so I kind of wanted to actually have time to have a bit of a proper look at, I say these guys, but these girls. So, I think it's safe to say that they've not been especially well received by the community in the sense that they're quite a hard unit to really get to work for you, or at least I'm finding them pretty difficult to get to work for me, and a lot of people are kind of a little bit disappointed in them. I guess in many ways that comes down to the fact that we have had a string of overpowered seasonal units, and so that's kind of what we have come to expect from our season units now. You know, we look at them and we think, why is this not crazy powerful? Well, that's probably just the attitude we've kind of got into because that's what we've had every time, so it might not necessarily be a bad thing that they're not crazy powerful, although they do perhaps feel a little too weak at times. They have had their first little mini buff today, had some improvements to how their cover commander actually works, was particularly well, only in the spear mode, that's where they get the cover commander. That makes a big difference because the cover commander is now a usable skill. Before, they could be in cover commander and they just stood there looking at the enemy even though they're right in front of them, so it made cover commander basically unusable. So it's been nice to have some changes there. We'll also get a little bit more resistance against cav. They basically don't get knocked down anymore, so it makes them a lot better against particularly things like monastics and armigers. From my experience, they still seem to be struggling quite a lot against hussars, but we don't necessarily need them to be able to be tackling that level of cav. You know, just dealing with armigers and monastics is effective enough. So what does the unit get in terms of abilities? I guess that's what we should be covering first. So they're sort of a hybrid unit, and this is where kind of the problems arise for me, but they basically have both spears and swords. So in spear mode, they get a cover commander, and they also get a guardian. The guardian, it used to be, if you watch the video on the PTR, like a Schiltron formation, but now the guardian actually forms like a crescent, like a semicircle, sort of similar to the Paladins shield wall formation. Does make them very tanky, particularly against range and stuff, but obviously it's quite a small frontage, so it's quite easy for enemies just to get around the back of it. Plus it's still obviously knocked down by things like Flying Reaper and etc. But it also gives a 250 point defense buff both to themselves and to your nearby allies. So in that sense, it's quite nice because you're giving not only yourself but the team a buff based on, you know, being able to use this as an ability. And you no longer have to fully get in the wall factor that to activate. As long as they get pretty much close, it will activate and you can break the wall formation and can maintain that bonus for sort of the next 9 seconds or however long it activates. Obviously, the cover commander pretty much works exactly the same as a unit like Spear Sergeants. Really nice, works quite well now it's had the buff, seems to be quite decent. But when you're in spear mode, you can press the 3 key, and now you suddenly draw swords, and you have a charge, and it's quite a decent charge. It seems to go for quite a long way, is quite damaging, quite effective. So yeah, quite like the charge, quite a big fan of that. And they get a triple strikes, which is basically sort of a combination of a hack and slash with a shield bash. Really quite nice. They sort of step into it and swing. Does quite a lot of damage, so long as the whole unit is standing up, you know, and activates. Quite a nice little ability. Reminds me vaguely of the Sealadars, even though it's not as damaging as that. So yeah, so they have some benefits there. But they kind of fall down in terms of their defensive stats. 1150 hit points isn't too bad for a tier 5 unit. In terms of defensive hit points, we're a little bit low, but it doesn't necessarily represent how sort of squishy they actually are as a unit. You know, I guess 640 on the piercing defense is starting to get a little bit on the low side, but in reality, when you use them in battle, it feels even worse than that. I think in part, unlike the Paladins, which have an active block as they engage enemies, these girls don't, and so that means that they sort of continuously sustain damage in the way that the Paladins don't. They also don't have the self-heal of Paladins. You could, of course, get the Doctrine and put that on them, and I think that would make a big difference. You can get the self-healing Epic Doctrine, that would be really nice. I would like to try and put one of them on them, but I haven't yet got one, so I can't. In terms of veterancy line-wise, I've gone down the top line. I tend to run them pretty 50-50 between spears and sword mode. I pretty much always run around in spear mode, and then sort of once I get stuck into the fight, I normally switch to swords. But we'll perhaps see kind of how I've been playing them a little bit later on in some of the battles. But both lines, I think, are viable. Depends a little bit it's arguably it's spear line for top and sword line for bottom, very vaguely. But both lines I think are pretty viable and actually aren't that radically different from each other. Doctrine-wise, a lot of the stuff is sort of pretty basic stuff. The Freya's charge cooldown, I quite like this because their charge is one of their better abilities they have, so a 5-second cooldown for me is worth putting on. We then got the double block ones, so I'm getting plus 650 block, plus 200% recovery. Nicely stole these off my Stalwarts. I put on their defensive one because it does give them that 50 across the board, which is kind of nice to have. It just gave them that increased slashing armor penetration for when they're in sword mode. Just to try and up their offensive capability that little bit more, because it's their slashing armor penetration which is kind of low and kind of really is what's drawing their damage potential down kind of quite a lot. Other than that, quite an interesting unit. Relatively, well, I was going to say relatively cheap to maintain. Yeah, relatively cheap to maintain. 5k for a Golden Era unit. Obviously, it's Season 7 at the moment, so it's 50% off. Normally this is going to be way back up to full cost. Get them restocked back up. So yeah, I think that's all I've got to say about them at the moment. Let's hop into some of the battles now and kind of see a few of the problems that we're having with them and why they're not necessarily quite as good as they do look on paper. So we load into a battle on Riverland Castles. I actually forgot to turn my recording on at the start and then was slightly alt-tabbed out, which is why I was just standing around like a lemon with my hero. But the ShieldMaidens managed to pick up some of the kills against the peasants. But it actually gives you a little bit of an idea that, effective as they are in that sort of capacity, they do sort of struggle a little bit in terms of raw damage. A Paladin unit would do more damage than these guys do in that sort of situation. But anyway, with that going on, the enemy team started to pressure the B point. So we started to push over there, go on this completely wild goose chase, trying to chase this guy down, until I decided that I really couldn't be asked to try and chase him around the map, so thought, sod him, we'll leave him. Let's head back to the B point and see what else we've got going on there. As we get there, there's really not much there, so I decided to pull back, start to head back round towards the A point. Seemed that we were getting a little bit of cap on there, so that seemed like, I guess, the area that was being focused the most, and I wanted to try and get the units stuck into a little bit of combat, really give them sort of a bit of a better run out. As we get down there, a few pipe militia and stuff, nothing really particularly too much to worry about. Just leave them in cover commander mode. I've got them obviously on spear. The cover commander buffs really worked quite nicely. We do draw swords and go for a charge, but it doesn't really pan out. But then we get this really glitchy mode with Poleaxe. He's both on the floor and on his horse. Then he teleports somewhere off to the left. And I don't know what was going on, but he got himself killed eventually. So this is how you'll start to see increasingly through this bit of footage how I'm using these ShieldMaidens. So I almost exclusively run in cover commander in most of the time. And you'll see that I'll always run them in cover commander. But then after a sort of been in an engagement for a while, I'll press 3 and charge, and you can pretty much do that instantly. You can 3, 1, click and charge. And the same in reverse. So when you want to flick back to spear mode, you can just press 3, 2 and you'll spear cover commander, and you can do that instantly and it will cut through. So just a minute or so later in the same battle, because nothing actually ended up really happening at the A point, and the enemy team are starting to make quite the push on the B point. Nice, these friendly paladins went straight for the charge, gave me the opportunity to get a clear path up, and we get stuck in against a couple of berserkers and some imperial javelins. We get a bit of an idea of what the cover commander benefit of this unit is, so we lock this maul down, and the unit obviously just fully focuses him. But then that gives me an opportunity. I draw swords, immediately go for the charge, and we can see what this charge is all about. And actually, it's pretty effective. Combine that with the triple strikes, it cut through pretty brutally against, well, what is a heroic era unit. I quickly flick them back into spear mode and start to pull them back, put them back onto cover commander, and kind of pull it out of the fight a little bit more. But then as the rest of the team keeps pushing in, it seemed a good opportunity to try and grab a few extra kills. Don't quite actually get the kill on that Poleaxe, but we did the bulk of the damage there with the unit as we then pull out, because the teams push them back to the tower, and I don't want to be chasing them down the tower or anything like that. So that seems to be, so far, the best way I've enjoyed using them. Flicking between cover commander in spear mode and making use of the charge and triple strikes. But as soon as that triple strikes is basically over, I've landed my charge, done my triple strikes, as soon as that ends, then I am going back to spear mode and cover commander. So that's why I'm trying to make use of both those abilities. I do find that the Guardian mode is pretty useful because you get the 250 point bonus, hit a defense point bonus, which is quite nice. And it seems to actually block quite a lot in Guardian mode. But in Shield Wall, I just don't find them to be super effective. I just don't find they seem to work that very well for me in that sort of situation. But I guess that in part might also be down to my playstyle. I play Paladins a lot. I don't like Stalwarts. I like that kind of aggressive, let's flank, push in and get stuck in style. And using cover commander along with the sword seems to be the best way to do that. Guardian is just for those sort of little spot point defences, hopefully as you'll see here in a minute. I think probably where the unit goes wrong though is that it's the ultimate hybrid unit. It's a shield wall, but it's not as good as Stalwarts. It's a sword unit, but it's not as good as Paladins. And here we see we push into these in Pike Guard, but we get away with it because we use Guardian, which seems to actually block the knockdown on the advance. So it's a sword unit, but it's not as good as Paladins. It's a tanking shield wall, but it's not as good as Imperial Spearguard. And that, for me, is its biggest problem. It's a hybrid master, jack of all trades, but master of none. Although it did cut through those that shield wall pretty neatly there with its shield charge. That's a charge probably to rival javelins. That's a charge to probably rival a Paladin. And so the fact it doesn't really excel in one specific area, I think some people will say that the hybridness, or the hybridity, is that a word? Probably not, but you know what I mean. The hybridness is what makes it good. But in reality, I think in most situations, there isn't a lot that you get by having the Ubid hybrid that you don't get from, say, a Paladin. So, for example, if you use Paladins, you're not going to use them as a shield wall. There's not many situations where you can't find a flank, make use of the charge. You X and V them through to get the damage. And there's pretty much all situations you can do that. Same with a Stalwart. There's not many situations where having a solid shield wall there is of benefit to the team. It's almost always useful and really a requirement. So other than the nice movement speed that they get because they're quite a lightly armoured hybrid unit, I think in most situations, I feel like you could do better with an equivalent unit of Stalwarts or Paladins. And that for me is ultimately the big problem with the unit and the big kind of drawback. And I think that's why a lot of people have had issues with them. There's definitely an element of playstyle adjustment. I really hated these, I keep wanting to say guys, I really hated these girls at the start of when I started playing them, when I first unlocked them. They have got better in my mind, partially because of the buff we've had today, but also partially because I think I've adjusted and found the technique for me that makes them work for me. But they aren't, for me, as good as Paladins or Stalwarts, and that is always going to be the problem. I think that's a problem with a lot of units, though, and more down to the extreme meta, perhaps, that are Stalwarts and Paladins than necessarily to detriment of other units. But anyway, with that aside, so far we've actually had a really quite a decent game. It goes to show that the unit can actually work and can be put to good use. So we actually cleared around the top of the A wall, flattened that unit of Imperial Spearguard, another unit of Imperial Javelineers, and as we come back we've unfortunately lost the B point, but I thought there was enough stuff here to give us a fair chance. So even though we push in on Spear, I draw swords, go for the charge, it flattens everything, and because it was going right to those archers, I thought let's just leave it, and it perfectly slams right into that lovely unit of Namkhans. I go on with the triple strikes, it flattens both the hero and all the enemy archers in that cluster. I was quite pleased with that, and that shows what the charge is like. They do actually have a genuinely nice charge. That's the one area of them in sword mode that I think is as good as the Paladins, is their charge. Because it's a long charge, it doesn't stop at the first unit it meets, it pushes through and on, and in that sort of situation, it works quite well. But the second the charge on my triple strikes is over, 3-2, back into Spear, back into cover commander. And that's how I've been running them. But as we got to the bottom of that stairs, I thought, oh god, there's a lot of stuff there. I don't think I wanted to hang around for that, so decided to pull back, make a bit of a run for it. And I guess that's one of the benefits of the movement speed. If I'd got a unit of Palace Guards or something else painfully slow, Iron Reapers, I guess I may well have been caught up there and been forced to fight and would have ultimately have lost. But get there, I should have waited on that supply point a bit longer. I thought they were going to start pushing it. I had a few, extra 5 seconds in which I could have healed up. But I pull the unit off, get up onto base point. and start thinking about where we're going to be defending. Trying to look whether they're going to be coming front or back stairs, and seeing sort of, you know, where I can get my flanking opportunities here and see where I can start to kind of exploit this one. But a few minutes later, because they just didn't really push for the first few minutes, and I thought it was a bit of a dull bit of clip, then the fight is still going on, and they start to make a push up the front staircase. I was actually thinking about pushing round to engage those Stalwarts until the Trebs land, and then I thought, yeah, let's not do that. But then that does open up the possibility of maybe going up these stairs and going around the Stalwart line. It's only reinforced as we start to do this, the units they've got with them end up retreating, so now those Stalwarts are on their own, and my teammate is just coming around with his Berserkers, so it fits in perfectly. I managed to really screw up my charge here. I got confused between which key I was on, and you can see vaguely Evo stupidity going on, but we get there in the end, get the unit charging, and you see what the triple strikes is like actually against the Stalwarts, and it works quite nicely. It cuts through them relatively effectively. But again, straight back onto Spear. I should have probably pushed down the staircase there. I think we had enough support, particularly with those Berserkers. It was a little bit too cowardly, particularly with only 3 minutes left now. I'm starting to get the upper hand. I should have definitely pushed it down there because I might as well. I think we could have probably cleared them out of that staircase with that. Only looked like they had pipe militia there. Should have been doable with a few of the enemy heroes to deal with. But with them going on, I decided to turn my attention back around, although it did just look like they trebbed themselves there, which was kind of an interesting decision. I can't see that there was any of our units there at all. But anyway, as we come back round to the back, we get a nice friendly hussar charge going straight down the staircase. Exactly what we want. And this time I do decide to follow up. A couple of condos and stuff still down here. I push on ahead. The unit just comes down. Anything that's a straggler behind me, the unit happily just stabs through. Particularly now it's had this adjustment in the latest patch. And of course it clears through them really without any trouble at all. I should have pushed into that spear advance with my Guardian mode, because that should have been a good way to counter them. Don't know why I didn't. Still learning the unit. That would be my excuse. That's what I'll go for. But yeah, should have definitely used Guardian, pushed straight into the front of that unit, and I think we could have done a good chunk of damage and actually beaten them. But as our friend Decav goes down this staircase, I decide it's time to be a little bit more bold. There's only 1 minute 50 left on the game now. It doesn't look like the enemy team is going to get it, so I decide just to go for it. As we come down, quite a bit of stuff down here now, and this is where these guys struggle quite a lot more. Push them in initially on Guardian against the Impike. We get a bit of knockdown, but not too bad. I go for sword, go for the charge, get it off pretty effectively and get quite a bit of damage in, particularly with the triple strikes, and start trying to sort of push my way through. And this is where for me the unit struggles in a way that a Paladin would be better. I switch back to Spear and cover Commander to keep the fight going. They just don't really have the hit points, in my opinion, to really push a long fight like this. All the fights we've had so far, we've pretty convincingly won because we've been able to use our charge, or we've played very aggressively and been able to get the win. I try and quickly get my Guardian mode off for this cavalry charge, but unfortunately I'm a bit too slow. I mean, unfortunately get flattened by that unit of monastics. But it does show what the unit is a little bit like. In the prolonged fights, I think they're going to struggle because a Stalwart or a Paladin is better. If you want to be able to make use of their hybridity, my new word, word of the day, invented by Evo, if you want to make use of their hybridity, you have to be finding those flanking fights, making use of the situation where you can throw your spear wall up, you know, tank that damage for a little bit, but you have to then be taking the fight to them to get the win. Switch to swords, get that charge in, get the damage in, get the triple strikes. That's really, for me, where sort of the real wins come from with the unit. But anyway, that's all we've got time for today. Hopefully you've kind of enjoyed this one. If you have, do let me know what you think in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe to the channel for a lot more Conqueror's Blade content. Thanks for watching, guys. See you all on the next video.